Those of you who have given money to an Ontario political party or been hit up by a political party to give should take particular notice. With the beginning of 2017, the rules around political fundraising in Ontario have all changed. The amounts you can give are much smaller. Some institutions can't give any more at all, and your taxes will now fund a bigger chunk of the expenditures. Here to weigh in on a brave new day for political fundraising, we welcome Tim Murphy, co-chair of the Liberals' 2018 campaign; Carla Weber-Gallagher, Provincial Secretary for the Ontario NDP; Mark Day, Deputy Leader of the Green Party of Ontario; Marcel Weider, President and CEO of the Aurora Strategy Group; and Sabrina Nanji, reporter with QP Briefing. And it's good to welcome everybody around our table here. Happy New Year to everybody. Let's just go through, in case anybody missed it, some of the do's and don'ts now of political fundraising. Sheldon, if you would, let's bring this up. Corporations and unions are now banned from donating money or guaranteeing loans to parties, candidates, constituency associations, nomination contestants, and leadership contestants. The maximum annual political contribution in a non-election year, that's this year, is now $2,400 to each registered party, its constituency associations, and registered nomination candidates. It'll be $3,600 in an election year, which will be next year. Now, citizens are going to help subsidize the cost of party operations through their taxes. This year, $2.71 for each vote collected in 2014 for the main parties. So that means the Liberals next year will get $5.1 million, the PCs $4.1 million, the NDP $3.1 million, and the Greens about $600,000, and the per vote subsidy goes down each subsequent year going forward. We should just point out, you don't see a Conservative representative around the table here. We invited someone. They were unable to provide someone for us, so it's just us tonight. Sabrina, I want to start with you. What was the problem that these new rules is supposed to fix?
So this is essentially the end of big money in Ontario politics. Like you mentioned, corporations and unions, well-heeled donors won't be able to bankroll the political parties anymore. And so the idea is that these changes will put an end to the appearance of a conflict of interest or, this so-called pay-to-play fundraising. I think the Liberals, being government and arguably the ones with the most influence, had come under fire from the opposition parties after reporters at Queen's Park had shed light on these, maybe shady, as the PCs had called it in question period, these fundraisers where ministry-specific stakeholders could pay a big chunk of money for a ticket to, rub shoulders in intimate parties and settings with the politicians. One good example of it is the Hydro One fundraiser that happened with the Minister of Energy at the time, Bob Chiarelli, and the Finance Minister, Charles Sousa. And in December 2015, they had charged $7,500 a ticket for the, and it was attended, this party was attended by bankers that, allegedly had profited from the Hydro One
So the thinking is
sale.
The optics of rubbing shoulders with a cabinet minister who has say over your file is not great.
Yeah.
So this is designed.
It doesn't really look good, I guess.
Let me follow up on the first thing you said. Carla, go to you first. The idea was to get the big money out of politics. Does this do that?
I think it starts to do that. I really do think that this takes a good, first step in getting the big money out of politics. I think there are still some areas that we need to continue to look at and to improve. I think, the ban on union and corporate contributions is certainly one of the biggest things that this bill accomplishes, and
does the NDP like that? I mean, you are for the union, and you don't mind unions can't contribute to the NDP anymore?
No, I think that really what we see with this bill is a step towards leveling the playing field in politics, and that's something we're very much in favor of.
Mark, how about you? Does this get the big money out of politics?
I would agree. I think it's a step in the right direction. I don't feel that it goes far enough. We'd like to see, corporations, unions don't vote, people vote. So people need to have more say and the power needs to be with the people, not with the corporations.
Tim, the government resisted doing this for a long time. Why, in the end, do you think they finally did it?
Well, I think because, obviously there was a fair degree of political and media attention being paid to it. And at the end, the Premier concluded that it was a reform that whose time has come. So she went and did, I think, actually an extremely thorough degree of reform. And I'm not surprised to hear the Greens and the NDP being in favor of it, because it gives them actually much more significant fundraising certainty than they've ever had before. You could arguably say that some of the NDP success federally came out of the fact that they had taxpayer contributed amounts provided to them regularly from the 04 through until Stephen Harper stopped it. I think it's fair to say that the taxpayer subsidy is a good thing, does level the playing field. I'm not really sure what more reform. This is a significant reform. It's among the most aggressive lowering of donation levels anywhere in Canada. When you actually look at our regime, compared to most other jurisdictions in the world, it now is a leader, right? You look at the US, where money sloshes around both on the spending and the raising side. We have significant limits on spending and now massive and significant limits on what can be raised. We're a leading organization, and I think the time had come and the Premier made the change.
Marcel, the reason you're here today is not because you represent any political party or not even because you represent any particular business. But you were one of the guys who put together what was called the Working Families Coalition, which was sort of a third-party player in politics. You raised money from various organizations in the hopes of putting that money towards candidates that you thought were simpatico with the message that you wanted. And basically, the new law says you can't do that anymore. So what do you think?
Well, this is a solution looking for a problem. I think that what we have here is, really something that's anti-democratic. That, when people want to get together and promote a position or an issue or raise it, this government is now limiting that ability to do that. And for that reason, I'm very much opposed to it.
You are a lifelong Liberal.
I am.
The Liberal and the Liberal Party of Ontario was the chief beneficiary of much of the money that you raised for the Working Families Coalition.
I would disagree with that, but...
Tell me how.
Because what we were doing is putting out issues affecting working families across the province, and a particular individual and party had policies that were going to hurt working families, and we brought those issues to the fore.
But basically, you funded parties that were against the Conservatives. I mean, we can say that.
No, we didn't fund anyone. We were an independent organization that raised issues that we felt were important for the Ontario electorate to understand what the consequences of those policies were going to be.
I don't want to be too cute with you here, but let's tell it like it is here. In some respects, the Liberal Party has unilaterally disarmed by putting forward this bill. They were the chief beneficiaries of your fundraising, and yet they have now deprived themselves going forward of that fundraising. Do you think that makes sense?
Look, the Working Families comes together during an election and looks at all the parties and identifies those particular issues that are of concern to them. So, for example, if an election were held right now today, for example, we have a major disagreement with the government on, for example, on the Ontario College of Trades. And so, there was a rally sponsored by several of the participants in the Working Families that had over 5,000 people demonstrating at Queen's Park. There's no guarantee that the Liberal Party wouldn't be an area that we would raise issues publicly on that particular matter. So there's no guarantee that this is an automatic for that party or for any other party.
Sabrina, this passed the legislature unanimously. Is there that much consensus truly around what has passed?
Definitely during the committee meetings, as this was first as Bill 201 and then after prorogation as Bill 2, there was a lot of, the Liberals have a majority, so essentially what they wanted was going to pass. But during the debate, I think the PCs and the NDP definitely had some amendments that they weren't passed, and they called them, I think the NDP MPP Catherine Fife had called it a Rolodex amendment, sort of tongue-in-cheek, I would assume. But essentially, we're not banning fundraising, we're more banning fundraising events. So there is nothing in the legislation that stops, a minister from calling up someone who has a stake in their ministry and asking them for, a $1,200 donation
I do
to
want
the
to
party.
ask, but let me ask about this, because one of the criticisms, we did a program about this back in December, and one of the criticisms we got, and Tim, we'll start with you as a former elected official, as you once were an MPP. MPPs can't show up at their own fundraisers now, is that right?
Well, you can show up at an event if it's basically you're raising money to pay for the event itself. So your corn roast, backyard barbecue, that kind of thing. But effectively, look, I mean, people were critical of people theoretically being able to buy access to a politician by virtue of buying a ticket to an event. So what's the way to prevent that? Well, you either ban fundraising completely or you say, then, okay, we'll ban that activity. And so what they did was ban that activity, because I agree, we didn't ban fundraising. And in fact, I think it is all the parties recognize that fundraising is an important part of the process of democracy. What we've done is put rules around it that try to make it sensible, a level that is not as significant. In fact, it's a 90% reduction of what could be contributed before. And so it's a set of rules that make it fair, level the playing field, provide support to parties who can manage to get votes so that they have an ongoing base. And to Marcel's point, there's a balance to be struck on both sides between third parties and political parties. And the notion is, third parties should be able to engage in the election debate. Of course they should, but why should they have unlimited ability to spend while parties have a limited ability to spend? And all it does is make a call as to what that level should be, both during a campaign and the period in the run-up. Who knows if it's the perfect amount? It's a judgment call. A judgment call was made. It's a significant amount. It's $600,000. It's a significant amount.
No, that's a very, that's a drop in the
differ
bin.
on that, and that's fair enough.
And
Marcel.
the ban, and this is one of the insidious things about this bill, is that it bans any participation 6 months prior to an election. So if a budget is dropped in that period, then that's considered election spending, and you're limited from participating in that by only a small amount of money. It really is an unfair, and I don't think it's going to stand up to a legal challenge at some point.
Do you think there is a legal challenge to be had here?
Well, I know that when the feds tried to do that, there was a challenge. The courts ruled that they could impose that limitation during the writ period, but not during the pre-writ period. And this is where it goes further.
You're a lawyer. I mean, this electoral law may not be your specialty, but is there a legal challenge here against this?
Oh, look, whether there's a challenge and whether it's a successful challenge is a different question. I think at the end of the day, look, courts have recognized in the field of democracy that, parties and legislatures need a reasonable degree of ability to set the rules for how democracy is done effectively. And I think courts have shown some discretion to the political parties and legislatures on that point. They're there to police when it's egregious. I don't think this is egregious, but I mean, obviously, if the Working Families decides to challenge, then a court will decide.
All right, Carlo, let me try this with you. We're not the United States, but of course, the United States Supreme Court took a look at this and decided that essentially money equals free speech. Right. And the court decided that you can't put any limits on free speech, and therefore it's the wild, wild west there. Anybody can do whatever the hell they want, pretty much. We may not want to go there, but does this inhibit, if money equals speech to a certain extent, are we inhibiting it too much here?
Well, I think when it comes to third-party advertising, there is definitely, there should be an avenue for groups that have opinions about issues that are before the legislature or that are provincial issues to be discussed during election campaigns. I don't think that it necessarily makes sense to restrict, let's say, families with children who have autism, who are over the age of 5, from talking about that during an election campaign and being able to sort of make that an issue that voters are thinking about. So, I mean, I think that there's an issue with the definition around how we can talk about, or how third-party advertisers can choose their issues and discuss their issues, because it's very limited.
But for example, sorry, Marcel, let me just try this with Mark for a second. For example, if the Sierra Club of Canada, let's say, wanted to drop a whole bunch of money behind the Green Party candidates running in 2018, they can't do that now. Do you have a problem with that?
No, I think that's fair. I think if we want to make, if we're concerned about free speech and we want to make it more equitable, then the thing to do is to allow the voting allowance, put that out to all registered parties, not just the parties, the 4 main parties as it is now. And that, again, goes back to the voters. People vote, not corporations, not third-party groups. It should be more incumbent on the people to have more of a say.
So you'd like to see more public financing of all people
all
who run for
parties,
office,
all
not just the
registered
4 main
parties,
parties?
yes.
All registered parties. Marcel, sorry, go
Just so
ahead.
your viewers understand, under this legislation, the maximum a independent party or third party can spend is $4,000 in a constituency. That barely covers 3,000 letters sent out in a riding, all right, in 1 month. And that's really not a very effective way of communicating an issue such as autism or Sierra Club or any other group. You know, to spend only $4,000 in a riding that has 85 or 100,000 people in it, that's really, you know, a gag order in a sense.
You know Premier Wynne.
I do.
You know her personally.
Yes, I do.
You've spent time with her. You've traveled with her.
Yes, I have.
Have you talked with her directly about this?
I have raised it.
And?
And she is, in her beliefs, moving forward on this path.
Why did she not see it your way?
I guess my level of persuasiveness was not as well as it should have been.
You're just not as persuasive as everybody thought you were, right? No, but the limits are dramatically lower than they once were. And
Absolutely.
presumably during your conversations, you said to her, "Here are the consequences of your doing that."
No, I didn't. I said, you know, it's a democratic right that people should be able to engage and encourage people to engage in the electoral process. And putting these limits handcuffs people's ability to participate. And we want to encourage more people to participate in the electoral process, not limit it. And as far as Tim's point is concerned, I have no problems with limiting the amount of money spent. And, you know, right now you were correct that there was no effective limit. And if they want to put on a limit that matches what the political parties or is less than, and I propose this in editorials of saying 2/3 of what the electoral parties are entitled to, we could live with that. You know, that's a reasonable limitation. But, you know, to go to the extreme that they've gone to really isn't benefiting everyone.
The challenge is it's fundamentally, you know, you're making a call about the balance, right? So if each of the parties have to follow a limit that's set in the legislation. Liberal Party, the NDP, the Greens, the Conservatives can't make up a new entity, can't form a new entity and then go spend as that. They have only that amount and that official amount in each riding and nationally. This does is says for each entity that wants to have a voice, they're not denied the voice. They're not, certainly they can, you know, issue press releases, talk to the media, have demonstrations. There's absolutely zero limitation on their ability to say that which they want to say in any forum they want. All it does is says you can't spend a certain amount. And the reality is you could have tens, dozens, hundreds of organizations, each at that limit, and could drown out the noise of that, the debate of the parties. So you've got to make a balance, right? I mean, is there a, you know, could I make a case for a little more, I probably could. At the end, you make a call. You know, is it perfect? Maybe not, but I think we're going to give this a shot and see how it works. And I think the balance is a pretty good one. And I think that's the logic that drove the Premier's analysis. And we now have a regime that I think is, as I said, one of the leading jurisdictions globally in limiting spending and fundraising.
Tim, you know, the parties don't control democracy. They don't control elections.
Agree with that
The
completely.
people are the ones who are at the center of elections and democracy.
Of course.
And so what you're saying is you're putting the political parties ahead of the people.
No.
Tell me how you're not.
It's a balance between allowing private money to do that which it wants or putting limitations on how much private money. And that all it does is there's some limitation on the private money.
You would
and I
like
think
private
most
organizations
Ontarians
to have
would
the same rights as political
I
parties.
think they should have.
And they don't, in your view.
Not
on that.
under-
but,
not
okay,
under
but
this,
understand what that
situation.
means, right? Understand what that means. The U.S. has a proliferation of things called PACs, political action committees, which is where private money goes in gobs, bucketfuls, barrelfuls to influence campaigns, and they are slivers away from individuals, and they spend millions, hundreds of millions in the U.S., and that is what let every private entity do what it wants.
And we're trying to avoid
system,
that,
and we're
obviously.
trying to avoid that system. You got to there's a balance.
Carl.
And is it perfect? I don't know.
I think, regardless of the amount of money that's actually allowed to be spent on third-party advertising, the issue is really the definition of third-party advertising, which in this bill is very restrictive. In this bill, it stops third-party organizations from being able to advertise on any issue that has been discussed by a party, a candidate, a member in the legislature, which is essentially everything. So, I think there's some issues around that, as well as the amount of money, which is what we've been talking
So
about thus
too
far.
restrictive in your view?
Yeah, I think so. I think, to my earlier point, I think that families with children who have autism should be able to talk about that as an issue during an election.
They can talk about it, they just can't spend as much as they used to be able to.
Well, yeah, they can't spend anything to talk about that issue.
You wanted to say, Sabrina?
Yeah, I think, okay, so the law is $600,000 that you can spend on advertising a third party in the 6 months leading up to the writ period, and then $100,000 during the election period. I think the thinking is that, to me, $600,000 still sounds like a lot of money, and maybe it's not as much for, working families, but I think that that's the thing, that even some business lobbyists or big union groups are the ones that can afford hundreds of thousands of dollars on ad campaigns, and they're the ones like putting the influence out, right? So I feel like that's
Let me
part
just
of
give you
it.
some context. To take a full-page ad in the Globe and Mail, for example, costs for an Ontario edition somewhere around $75,000 for one day, one ad.
So 600 grand doesn't go that far, is what you're
600,
saying.
it doesn't go
How much does
very.
a Facebook ad cost? That's way more effective. Oh, sorry, Globe and Mail.
I'm not going to get into that debate today.
To take out an ad on television, you're looking tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars, because you have to repeat those ads in order to get some traction and to be able to reach people.
Can I look at the flip side of this for a second, though, which is I've heard from numerous business leaders in this province over the years who really are sick to death of being hit up every other day by the political parties. I'm telling you, the emails from you guys go out almost every other day, or maybe three a day, hitting up people for donations.
It's going to get worse.
Well, now,
Because
why
you've got
would
to
it
raise
get-
it by individual person.
So
think
individuals
about-
are going to get more emails,
Individuals are going
but
to,
companies
because,
won't.
yeah. So every one of the people inside the company are now, you're going to have to, because the reality is this system, back to your point, motivates.
Because we're not changing our methods.
No,
it's
but
going
it-
to change for everybody else, all the other
No,
parties.
well, we've done it too. All the parties have done it to a greater or lesser degree. And fundamentally, what this will now say is you've got to go raise your money, $1,200 at a time, or lesser amounts, whatever you can get, and accumulate the $10, the $20, up to a maximum of $1,200. We saw the federal Liberal Party do that quite successfully under Justin
10
Trudeau.
years to get
It
to
took,
that.
I was up there for part of it and saw it, agreed. And so it's about building an apparatus that allows you to go out and reach people individually. But that means you're going to get a lot of emails.
But that means you're going to have the old-fashioned bagmen and bundlers, are now going to come in. Bagmen are the people who are going to go around to those individuals and collect the $1,000 checks. And the bundlers are those people who are going to go to individuals and say, can you give me $25? All right, write me a check for $100. You'll get $75 as a tax credit back. And, they get a stack of 50 or 100 of these checks. And then they go to the candidate or the MPP and say, here's what I'm bringing you. And that's a bundler.
Are you saying that the problems that this new law was designed to change are in fact not going to be changed at all?
Exactly. I don't think this is really going to move, and remove the transparency that we once had. I think we had a good system. It was transparent. People were following the rules. I think this now lends itself to more abuse.
Carla, do you see that?
I really do think that this is a good step in the right direction, but I do agree that there is there's a big loophole in the fact that cabinet ministers, for example, can still make those phone calls from their Rolodexes and collect those $1,200 checks from the board of directors of, X corporation. And I think that does still create a bit of a conflict,
But
for
there's
sure.
no $10,000 a ticket thing anymore,
There's no $10,000 a ticket
which
thing
was the
anymore.
really
That's right.
egregious stuff that people were concerned about.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. Every time there's a new system, and Tim referred to political action committees in the United States, which when they tried to put some, boundaries around fundraising down there, they gamed the system, they figured it out. How long before people start to game the system here and figure out where the loopholes are in this new law?
I think they probably have already
Yeah, I was going to
figured
say,
it
That's
out.
I've already done that.
I guess, the argument is that money is always going to make its way into politics. It's just how do we make it more transparent and fair? And I think the difference is the appearance of a conflict of interest and an actual conflict of interest, because the government has assured us that nothing bad ever happens, even though it may not look. It may not pass the smell test. The Integrity Commissioner had actually done an investigation into that fundraiser with the Hydro One Commissioner, and he basically said that a reasonable, well-informed person would have concerns. So Government House Leader Yasser
Concerns, but not illegal.
Right, yeah, exactly. And he doesn't have the ability to investigate the appearance of a conflict of interest. So that's where this code of conduct is going to come in that we haven't seen yet, but the Government House Leader Yasser Naqvi has said that all MPPs are working together on a code of conduct, and I know that's something that the federal government has, but I guess we're having sort of this mirror scandal happening.
Well, tell me this.
there.
In our last 30 seconds here, do you believe that the public ought to feel more confident about the whole political fundraising system now?
Yes, I think it could definitely be stronger, but this is why it passed unanimously in the House, even though the parties weren't completely on board with it. I think this is one good thing, but it could always be better.
I am looking forward to finding out whether or not the Working Families Coalition wants to sue the Ontario government for, what, infringement on their free speech rights or something like that? You let me know if that happens, okay, Marcel?
You'll be the first.
Okay, terrific. Good to have you all around our table here at TVO tonight. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.